Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. This is the April 19th meeting of the Land Use Development Team Oversight Committee. And may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, we have Chair Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Great, we are all present, so we'll go on to item 2 on the agenda. Are there any announcements at this time? Hearing none, I'll close agenda item 2A.
I was just coming on to say no.
Okay, perfect. And then, so I'm on to item 2B, the approval of the February 24th minutes. Have my colleagues had a chance to read them, and is there a motion to approve the minutes from February 24th?
So moved. I'll move the approval of the minutes.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any public comment on this item? Not hearing any or seeing any in the.
No, there are no hands raised for public comment. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Close public comment on that, and can we have a roll call for the minutes, please?
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Aye.
And Chair Friedman.
Yes, minutes are approved. And so now on to items 2C, and this is for public comment for items not on today's agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to items not on today's agenda? Please raise your hand in the app. And not seeing any.
There are no hands raised. Thank you so much, Chair Friedman.
Thank you. I'll close public comment. And now I will turn it on to agenda item 3. And it is item A, update on the process improvements, and I will turn that over to Ms. Renee Brooke to start the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into the presentation by Ms. Tina Dye, we do like to do just a real brief overview at the beginning of these meetings to remind everyone who might be viewing, maybe if it's their first time, what the committee purpose and scope is of the Land Development Oversight Committee. The purpose is to advise your land development team staff and oversee implementation of process improvements and other related issues as recommended by the NOVAC Consulting Group. And that is exactly what we'll be doing later this afternoon, is updating you on all of those recommendations. This next slide is just a reminder of which departments and divisions make up the city's land development team. And then I will pass the baton to our Chief Building Official, Tina Dye.
Just 1 second before you begin the presentation, Ms. Dye, just for housekeeping for my colleagues in the public to follow along. As we go through this, we're going to have specific sections with each recommendation. And so for my colleagues, we're going to ask questions at the end of each section. And then at the public, when the whole presentation is done, we'll open it up to public comments. So I hope that's clear rather than each individual measure. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. At the last meeting, we discussed process improvements that were underway, and one of them was to create some pre-approved plans to help the public and design professionals save time and money and speed up the plan review process. And there are several areas of code requirements to do this for, so staff decided to create the first standard plans for an area that created a lot of confusion and resulted in a lot of plan check corrections. The first standard plan addresses stormwater best management practices for construction, during construction for stormwater and erosion control. It covers 3 various scopes of projects, and staff spent a lot of time on this, and it's a very nice product. There is only one example here, but they are also on our website if you go to the building and safety link. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to cover updates on process improvements still under construction. Next slide. So fee estimates is a very helpful tool to the public to know what they're getting into before they submit their application, or they can receive a fee application after submittal. As it is now, we receive questions regarding fees almost daily. So this will allow an applicant to know what they're getting into way before the permit's ready to be issued. What's happening now is that the fees aren't given to the applicant, the total fees, final fees aren't given to the applicant until right before the permit's issued. So an applicant's very eager to get their permit, but they see all of the fees and it creates a lot of questions, and therefore by slowing down the permit issuance, because it takes 1 to 2 days to hear back from staff regarding the fee structure and what it means and what the fees are for. So because we lost our Acela in-house administrator recently, we did not implement this in the permit tracking software, but staff felt it was important enough to create a paper version temporarily, and that is almost complete. Next slide, please. This slide represents a plumbing code interpretation. Construction codes are the minimum standards, and we have to make sure they're met. However, there have been occurrences here where a helpful practical application of the code was not being made. So this code interpretation will provide consistency with other jurisdictions, and sorry about that. This works for small businesses and supports small businesses, whereas before they were required to provide 2 separate restrooms, which could lose valuable lease space and even kill the project. So this has been very well received by the public. Next slide, please. Over the last month, LTD management and staff met with the local architects group to discuss process improvements. And we were really grateful that they initiated these meetings with us so that we could hear directly from them about specific concerns. And we were even able to resolve a few of the concerns at the meeting or shortly after the meeting. And we're in review of other requested concerns or that they brought up. Next slide, please. So this topic was brought up at the last meeting, and the collection of 100% plan review fee at the time of submittal is standard for all of the surrounding jurisdictions. In a business sense, it's more prudent to collect all of the fee up front. We do work on cost recovery. So if we're not collecting the entire plan review, there is potential for us to not recover all of the fees that we need to. This is also consistent with how planning applications are taken in. Next slide. And then just a couple more miscellaneous efforts this last month. We did a little extra public outreach. We saw that the PV systems that met the requirements for on-demand systems were not being utilized. So we sent an email to the frequent flyer PV designers and contractors, making them aware of the new option. And also we send an email to applicants when we know that a plan review is late, which lets them know that we haven't forgotten about them and that their project's important to us. And we provide them with the reviewers' contact information and the supervisor's contact information. That's about all I have to update. All of these small things collectively make big changes. I've already received a lot of positive feedback from the public, and I hope that you guys have too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. And so first, if there's any questions from my colleagues regarding the process clarity and consistency section. Mr. Jordan, Councilmember Jordan, I see you on, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm Ms. Dye, welcome aboard. I know you're already on board, but welcome to the hot seat. On the fees, so I've had a little personal experience with this, and then I've obviously had people that forward along information. One of the things that I've noticed, and I'm just wondering if that, two things, and so that are they included in these upgrades to that process, and that is a better description or itemization of the fees rather than what I would just coin a meaningless phrase line with a whole bunch of money at the end of it that really doesn't explain what they did. And are we attempting to use the same language as that language that we show those fees, that fee structure in the enabling ordinances? Or are we using internal language that is different from that, and nobody can even go to the ordinance and figure out how they match up when they look at a fee sheet from community development?
That's a great question, Councilmember Jordan.
Or actually two, so I hope that's one good question, I hope.
Sure. We are implementing some changes in the descriptions in Acela. We plan to have that done at the same time when the fee estimates are live. So those will coordinate with our adopted fee schedule.
Okay, that was one of the confusions I've seen. And so both of those are really the same thing. Better description, right? Rather than fees for reviewing your plan, big dollar amount, right? There'll be more information there and it will match. And then the other question I had on this, this change to, I think I understood what you meant, a change to upfront fees in some or all of the operation. Rather than an estimate of an upfront fee at that time, can we also contemplate an ongoing payment plan structure? So you're not earning those fees the first month also for a month's of review. Is there a method to collect fees? If you're going to have a set of plans for 2 or 3 months, is there a method to cut them in half and let somebody pay half up front and half in a month, that kind of thing, rather than the total estimate up front?
Well, I think that's two different things. The estimate just provides an applicant with an expectation of what they will pay at the end of the building permit process. And the plan review fee is more of a deposit that they don't get it back, but it's called a plan review deposit. So those are two different.
So is the plan review deposit 100% of the anticipated fee?
No, the plan review fee is based on our fee study for cost recovery for just the plan review portion. So typically jurisdictions collect the entire plan review up front.
Of anticipated plan review fee, right? Because does it not vary over because of the time you spend or not?
You can assess more plan review time if it's gone beyond 3 or 4 plan reviews. There's an hourly rate you can charge. I don't see that being applied here very often.
Okay.
So generally, it's just per the fee schedule.
So it generally fits a category and there's your amount. And so instead of playing with them and when they look at you at the counter and go, oh my God, it's like, here's what it is and here's your deposit, right? You get just going. Okay, that makes sense to me.
Okay, as far as the payment plan, I know the county has something set up that way, but I've never worked that way before. I could look into it if that's something you guys would like.
Just kind of a global question on that. I just know stuff is generally good projects are down there a long time, becoming better projects. And to then, even if you know what that's going to be at the end, I just don't know, is there some worth to allowing people to come in and keep amortizing away at that fee structure rather than at the end of the process, they got your check, they got school fees check, they got whatever check they got, and they got to come up with it all at one time. And we, the counterpoint to that is yeah, you knew what it was going to be and you could have saved it all those months too. But most contractors I know go buy a boat as soon as they get overpaid and forget that they have fees coming in 3 or 4 months. So just a thought. And it's not something I'm saying should be there. It's just a thought if we've ever thought about it, and we can keep it in our toolbox if that gains any traction and we ever hear it again. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Any further questions on this section? Not seeing any, we will continue on with the presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'll take it over from here. I'm Renee Brooks, City Planner. I'll be covering, go to the next slide here. So at the request of the committee, we're bringing to you today a complete status update on all 31 of the NOVAC group recommendations. And I'll be covering all of them, but I do want you to know there are many other LDT managers and supervisors logged into the webinar that I'm sure would be happy to participate if questions are directed to them. Otherwise, I'll cover this information, and I believe, Mr. Chair, as you had mentioned, as I go through each of these 6 different categories, I think you wanted to pause after each category and then take questions rather than after each individual recommendation. Is that correct?
Correct, Ms. Brooke. Thank you. Just like we did with the upfront process. So same.
Okay.
Same.
Sounds great. So just by way of background, in case we have new people viewing the LDT Oversight Committee, the NOVAC Consulting Group released a report last August after much evaluation, interviews, work with staff, work with our stakeholders to come up with recommendations to our land development process. And the comprehensive report is posted on our website, on the LDT Oversight Committee website. And it has 31 recommendations, which I'm going to cover now. And within each of those recommendations, we pulled out some specific tasks that were mentioned to implement the recommendations. And that just helps it be a little bit more digestible rather than a broad recommendation. And then we'll provide an update on each one of those. So the 31 recommendations broke down into 6 different categories based on these bullets you see here. And I will just start going through them. So the first category of vision, outcomes, and customer service was pretty broad in scope and pretty, high level recommendations. The first is to define a consistent land development process, vision, and customer service expectations. So that involved the land development team coming together to define its mission and vision statements. And we did that in September and November last year. So our mission statement for the LDT is helping you enhance our city and build a better community. And the vision statement is, we are a solution-oriented team dedicated to providing clear and dependable guidance to achieve our community's vision. And that's a vision statement. It's intended to be something that we want to work toward. So we understand that we might not be there yet, although I think generally we are, but it's a good reminder for us to keep this vision statement in mind as we are working with customers and working with trying to make process improvements. And then the buy-in from the leaders of the LDT process, the managers and supervisors, that's an ongoing effort that we of course will continue to recommit to the mission and vision statement of the land development team. The second was making it very clear that land development team staff are expected to participate in the PRT and DART process. That's the pre-application review team and development application review team process. Those are acronyms for pre-application, before someone submits a formal application, and development application is really the formal application. But what's embodied in this recommendation is really a recommitment to the meetings and the internal staff discussions and the meetings with the applicants that's expected in order to provide good customer service to our applicants, that we have the right staff people in the room having a conversation with the applicant about how their project might need to be adjusted or how we have conflicting regulations. And so really having everybody in the room together in the virtual room this last year has been really important. And so that expectation to make sure that staff are in attendance went out in a written message to staff last September, and then we are ongoing monitoring that and making sure. And just in my check with the other land development team managers last week, I'm hearing good feedback. They are aware of this expectation, and so we are staying committed to making sure that staff are involved. And that is part of that. We provide relevant comments to the applicants. At times when we're really busy, we might tend to provide boilerplate information, things that are relevant to the project, but maybe not as specific as they could be. And so again, making sure that when the planning division case planners and the development review supervisors reviewing these written letters, they're looking at them with an eye toward resolving internal conflicts and making sure the comments are relevant before these letters go out to the applicant. The third recommendation is making sure that not only that our customers are aware of our customer service, the level of customer service we'll provide, but that that's made clear to our applicants and stakeholders so that they know that when they enter the land development process, what should they expect? This is still in process. We haven't implemented as much of this. We've been working on the internal expectations, and through a variety of means, we are working to improve our communication with stakeholders and applicants. It's really important that we do that so that we have shared expectations of what to get out of the process. So this one will take a little bit more time. Recommendation number 4 has not been started yet. This is a really comprehensive customer service training program for staff. Specifically creating a baseline customer service training for all LDT staff, and then training specific to the functions within the LDT, which does occur. It's maybe not as formal as what Novak had recommended. And we did have an ability prior to COVID and working remotely. We had quarterly LDT meetings where all the staff would be in the David Gebhardt room, and we would get trainings on each other's functions and be able to keep each other updated in that way. We haven't been holding those meetings since we've gone remote. And so that would be a good thing to start back up, to just give this extra bit of customer service training as we can in the remote environment, at least. And then providing customer service training to our land development team related advisory bodies. So that's Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Historic Landmarks Commission, Single Family Design Board. We've had some initial conversations about that, but we've had to put that on hold temporarily due to some other higher priorities, both process improvement priorities and other workload priorities, but that is on our radar to be doing. Updating the city's website and making sure that we are utilizing all the tools we have available to us to enhance communication with our customers, with just a general homeowner to a very experienced architect or engineer. One recommendation is to create a land development team webpage, which we don't have at the moment. Each division and department within the LDT has their own pages with lots of links and helpful information, but we don't have one single landing page where someone could go to start off with very basic questions to just understand who they might need to interact with. And this comes up later in another recommendation about having somebody like a receptionist function in our lobby to direct people the right way. So this is something we've discussed, having the LDT landing page for people to go, and then from there, get to the different divisions and departments that they need to based on the scope of their project. We have tried to provide what information we can within each division. So for example, we have the land use and planning guide that we developed and posted last December on our planning division website. It has a very high level overview of land use planning in Santa Barbara and talks about all the different interplay of the design review bodies and planning commission and the general plan and the zoning ordinance, but might not be applicable to just somebody wanting to remodel their home. So we do know we're gonna try to develop a landing page for that. And then something else we haven't yet implemented is online screening questions. Again, this could be something for a very basic project or a novice project applicant to just help kind of get them going in the right direction. And it might be a couple screening questions that gets them talking to the right person. But what we have done, as not having been able to implement the LDT webpage, is we are using a variety of other methods to communicate with our customers, including city news and brief, if the topic is of broad interest, because that goes out to about 30,000 folks in the city or people who have interest in the city. We regularly have information posted in the AIA Santa Barbara newsletter about changed policies, procedures, advisory group recruitments, all sorts of information. We also post updated information on our website. We do a lot of land development team bulletins. People can sign up for these e-bulletins and we'll push out information that affects land development processes. And just a couple examples of some bulletins that went out recently about changed processes and regulations. The recommendation number 6 is developing video and other communication tools to educate customers. So this is kind of getting at the multifaceted way of engaging with our customers. And we do have a couple short videos now on a variety of our web pages. Planning and building safety both recently added videos on their pages. We have really short videos. When we launched the online application intake process through Acela back last April, there's a lot of little short videos in there for applicants to figure out how to sign up to be a user in Acela, how to submit an application. And so we're trying to get at it in a variety of ways. Also developing process maps to help applicants understand the process. We do have a workflow map for the planning division process, which is probably the most robust process in the land development process. So we're hoping that that is informative for people. And I'll just show you a couple examples. Here's just screenshots of some videos that we have on the Planning Central webpage about our new application procedures. This is the land use and planning guide that I mentioned. And then Building Safety has a short video on the process that a building permit application goes through. And then this is a quick little screenshot of the planning process flowchart, with the dark colors being the process that most projects are subject to, and then there's some either optional things or maybe less common aspects to the flowchart. And we can get into details on that if you have questions, but wasn't planning to cover that. And then the 7th one in this category is to refine and update the phone tree system. We've not implemented this. This is just to have a more robust way for applicants, customers to be able to get in touch with different staff. And right now we have a limited number of branches on that tree. So we've been picking and choosing what we think are the most commonly used. It is a budget item for us to update the phone system to a more robust system. So we haven't taken that on yet. And I think I'll pause here because the next section gets into intake and application screening.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Are there any questions? I see Councilmember Gutierrez, your camera's on, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Brooke, I really like what the updates that you guys have done, but my only concern is that I still get constituents calling and just with a lot of concerns on how to navigate the city website. And a lot of this has to do with, you have to be somewhat technical savvy to navigate our website. I know it's not ideal and this is work in progress. But I think that phone call or that direct contact with the staff personnel is also going to be critical. You talked about, first-time applicants. A lot of our local architects, developers, people in construction, a lot of the language that is used, they're used to this. They kind of understand how an application process, you know, how it, the different processes and what you need to do. But for somebody that owns property and that finally says, hey, let's do an AUD or some modifications at their home, this can be very overwhelming. Have your department thought of assigning someone just to have that one-on-one contact with staff, with the phone services? And I understand during COVID, we can't have in-person contact.
Sure, Committee Member Gutierrez. So you're exactly right. There's a lot of jargon in the land development process, and our seasoned applicants can probably more or less figure out where they can get the information most of the time. One of our first contacts with applicants, homeowners, is usually the front counter, whether it's a phone call or an email or someone physically coming into the building, which we haven't been able to do as much. We just reinstated the appointments in person, but our public counter emails, email inbox and phone have been really busy lately. So we are making that contact. It's of course not as, it's tough to do when you're not face to face and looking at plans together with each other. You know, we've been trying to make the best of it as we can. But I think the point you're getting at is something we hope to do with the land development web page. And talking with the other managers, we've said we really need to make this like common language speak, not jargon, not acronyms. Like, I want to, you know, build a fence. I want to change out the windows in my house. I want to remodel my bathroom, and then try to help them navigate on a website if people are comfortable with that. Of course, there's always the option of coming in, calling us, emailing us, and we'll get people to the right division to start with. But I'm open to all types of suggestions. If there's just other methods that people are more comfortable with coming into our process, that I'd be happy to hear more about that.
Also, just keeping in mind maybe having brochures or flyers that are easy on the eye, that are both in English and Spanish. Maybe, you know, 2-minute videos, 3-minute videos on how the process works, and just reminding the clients that walk in the door, if they're working with an architect, what to expect from the city part, because I've gotten a couple of phone calls and emails about, especially during the pandemic, how people are really relying on the architect that they're working with, and they're not submitting the permits on time, which is not the city's fault, but they don't know about this online system where they can, you know, punch in their case number and then everything comes up of what has been submitted. Just simple little things like that that we could probably do for the public.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, really, because you're right. Anybody who's a registered user of Acela, and if they're connected to that case, which a property owner would be connected to that case, they can check the status. And maybe people don't know that. So that's a good way for us to get information out. They can be keeping track of their own application too.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. I see Councilmember Jordan. You have the
Hey,
mic.
Mr. Rick, how are you? There you go. I'll really be back to the first one. And I'm just wondering if we'll ever get to a point where there's a viable method to do exit surveys to reaffirm that we have made strides in those, and they're continuing, once we make them, that they're ongoing and continue to be upheld.
Committee Member Jordan, are you referring to staff exit surveys or applicants?
No, yeah, applicants.
In the
So that,
process?
you know, we say we've completed that. We say we've completed that.
Oh,
The rest is ongoing. How is so that's an internal assessment in our, how are we gauging it from a customer standpoint?
yeah, that's a great question. and you're leading into our last slide of the day, which is we'll give you an update, or at least talk about the idea of having the public workshop. We're calling it a public workshop. It's a loose term, but we're thinking late summer where we invite our stakeholders to engage in that conversation with us. And I'll definitely cover that at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough. And then number 4, the bullet on the customer service training for advisory bodies. So the way I heard you talk about that was, the way I interpreted what you said, what it would be advisory bodies to projects or applicants. And I'm just wondering if there's an avenue also there for internal training in the same way. So advisory bodies to staff. So it's, going both ways. I frequently see that there's also some tension in project discussion between advisory bodies and staff members, just as there is the same tension between advisory bodies and project people. So I'm just wondering if you see any merit in that idea.
Committee member Jordan, I want to make sure I understand you. So what's listed here was the intention of this customer service training directed toward the advisory bodies.
Third bullet is the one I'm really focusing on. So,
Right.
So customer service training. So the way I read that, the PC's customer is the people who are standing in front of them, but that's an external customer. But the PC's internal customer are the people from staff and the planner who appear in front of the PC. And customer service goes both ways, internally and externally.
Yes, thank you. I think I understand. So you're right. So the first 2 bullets are directed at staff. The third bullet is directed at this other body of really important people who also impact the land development process. This is our advisory bodies. And so again, we've just started discussions about what the scope of this training might be, but it would be sort of a reminder and a reinvestment from those advisory body members too, that they impact the process and that the service they provide to the community is important, but you need to balance that. It'd probably be pretty wide ranging. We call it customer service. Some part of it might just be decorum and interaction with staff, interaction with applicants, your role in the land development process.
I will leave that bug in your ear. Okay, just that I see some merit into identifying internal customers that you're providing service to and external customers that you're providing service to, and the responsibility goes both ways. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. I do have a couple of questions myself, Ms. Brooks. So on item 4, you had mentioned that the baseline customer service training has not been implemented yet. And I know that's because we haven't been in the office, but what are some of the factors, and being that there might be a significant change in the governor's orders on COVID and potentially coming back into the office in June, do we have any estimated timelines or any protocols coming in place of that, or is this one where you need budget resources to be able to do it?
Thank you, Chair Friedman. This one's a little bit of time and a little bit of budget is why. Partially made a little more challenging by being remote, although we can do things remotely. We can do trainings remotely. I think, just as I understand this recommendation, calling it baseline customer service is really, it's an extension of our mission and vision statements, really. It's how do you go about your everyday business to make sure that you're carrying out the vision that's understood by all the LDT staff, because we all have very specific things that we do within the land development process, but that there's this common understanding. And this too, I think, is maybe getting at what committee member Jordan was saying too. Our customers are each other too. So we have the applicants are our customers. The Public Works Department is the customer to community development sometimes. And so I think it's just really establishing that training, that if we were going to have an outside consultant help us with that. It would take money. We haven't actually even had the conversation to know if we absolutely would ask for outside help or if we would try to build this from the inside out. Yeah, I think we've all been adjusting to a lot of other changes and haven't been able to sit down and focus on this aspect.
Thanks for the clarifications, and I think Councilmember Jordan raised a good point between internal and external customers that we need to elaborate. And I think this is the foundation, the customer service is the foundation, because that builds upon everything else we're trying to do. So as you go through that, please keep us apprised, especially if there are budget considerations that we need to implement this as we get into budget season. I know it's going to be tough this year, but we want to have this foundational piece, such a key component moving forward, that it should be a priority. The other question I have is on the next one, item 5. You mentioned that in the slide, I'm trying to read it here, it says website not yet implemented options include integration with the city website replacement project. So I know that the council has approved redoing our website completely because our current system just doesn't meet the needs. So one, is there any timeline that you're aware of on that, or are you doing what you can now with the expectation that when the new website comes in, you're going to have more just user-friendly resources? So if there is somebody else online, maybe that might be able to give us an update on that timeline, and if not, perhaps we could just get an update at another time on the full replacement of the city website.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I think there might be other people on the webinar that that actually are on this team. I don't know if Adam Handel doesn't mind hopping on, or someone else, anyone. He helped me write this response, but if not, I'm not aware of the exact timeline for the city replacement project. But as I understand from the input that I was provided, it might give us this opportunity to customize it a little bit more for a function like this, like online screening, for people to help get started off in the right place as they're considering a project.
Perfect, thanks. In the future, we can get the timeline. I think it would just, it goes in what you're saying is that we're going to be updating our website, and we're having a new citywide website. So I think there's more to come on this, and it's just helpful for us and the public to know what that timeline is. So I don't have any further questions. I see Councilmember Jordan, you have a follow-up question. You are on mute.
First time this year. So I just realized now's the time for comments too. In that section, Ms. Brooke, the important thing to me is that and I don't think that it's not important to you and staff too, but just to state it out loud, is that the people-to-people interactions are the #1 priority. It's easy to be graciously right. It's much more difficult, because we're humans, to be graciously wrong. I can go home and get told that every day, right? And I think that's when things get tense and mistakes are made, or we're trying to reinvent these processes and stuff, that it's really the first hurdle is a customer service relationship hurdle, and that's to be polite and gracious no matter what. And so when you're looking at these things and how to implement, what we can implement, what's going to cost money, really it doesn't cost any money just to be pleasant regardless of the situation. And that to me, I think, should be kind of one of the things we never lose track of as you're working through these. Like, some things will come fast, some things will come slow, some things will have to wait for money, but there's still that person-to-person engagement that, even if it's a bad engagement, it should be a nice, pleasant conversation with apologies or thanks or whatever it is. So I just wanted to make that point. I have no doubt that runs from the top down, but I know at times it gets strained and difficult, and you just need to reinforce. I'm guilty as anybody else. So just wanted to get that in. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Should have left you on mute there. Just kidding. So on to the next section, Ms. Brooke.
I'm sorry, I was just, Rebecca Bjork, Interim Community Development Director, just to get back to Councilmember Jordan, Councilmember Friedman. The schedule for getting the new website up and running is February of 22. So not quite a year away.
Okay, that's pretty exciting. All right, so moving on to the next section of intake and application screening. There's a couple of recommendations in this section. The first is to create an internal checklist and guidelines for when different work groups within the land development team would be involved in reviewing a project based on the scope. And we have completed this. We've had that in place for a long time for the more complex projects that go to Planning Commission. That's the DART, Development Application Review Team projects. We've had that in place since the late 90s. Since then, we've formalized the review of our design review only projects and modifications, zoning modifications. And so we recently coordinated with the other LDT divisions to come up with thresholds for when they want to review these projects earlier rather than later. And that has really helped us prevent, to the degree possible, late hits where they might have otherwise only seen these projects once it was submitted for a building permit. So we've done this. This is an area where I think in a later slide, I'll talk about how we're reevaluating this too, because we're realizing maybe we've roped in too many projects and we've overwhelmed ourselves. So this is this balancing act that we're trying to create in terms of good customer service, but not burning people out and missing things. So you'll see that come up on another slide, I think. Improving the intake process to screen applications for completeness. So when Novak was doing the interviews and analyzing our process, we were in the midst of changing to online application intake. So we have up until April 2020 taken in applications in person, hard copy. We sat there with the applicant at the counter. We went through their materials in person. And if they didn't have what we needed, we could say, we can't accept this application. You need to come back another time with all this. Now that everything is coming in online through Acela, we can provide checklists, and we do, but there's still this period of working with the applicant before we can formally take it in, make it worthwhile to route to staff. And all that's coming, all that time is coming after they've already uploaded all these materials through Acela. So some of these recommendations are a little bit outdated because it assumes that we're working with them face-to-face in person, and now we're not. So we might need to get at this a different way. That really leads to the second bullet with the counter staff screening applications. Again, we could do that in person when we could. So what we're doing now is our counter staff review everything that came in, and applications can come in 24/7 now. On the weekend at night, we're showing up to work in the morning and seeing everything that came in and downloading all that and processing that. So this is important because we only want to route projects that have adequate information. It is adding some time to the counter staff's workload. And so this recommendation, I think the intent here is still important. We just need to work with our new system in taking applications online. So it's not as easy as being able to reject something in person. This one, we're close to having this implemented. This really came down to one task. This recommendation came out of frustration really from most people involved in the process, where through the permit plan check process, there were just multiple resubmittals, 4, 5, 6 times without the permit getting issued, and sometimes for various reasons. This recommendation is to have a formal mechanism in place where a manager gets involved if a permit can't be issued after a certain number of reviews. And it might be because maybe staff missed something and we've asked for something additional, and that the permit can't be issued, maybe the project scope changed and we added more comments, maybe the applicant isn't responding to our corrections and we continually reissue the same corrections. But in any event, whatever the reason, if a permit can't be issued after a certain number of reviews, and we're discussing 3 among the managers, then a manager gets involved and just tries to mediate the issue. It might also mean maybe the property owner needs to take a more active role in the project too. So this is all with the intent of trying to get permits issued and projects under construction without continuous review, multiple reviews. Okay, and that was it on those. So if we have questions on those 3, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions on the intake and application screening process? Not seeing any, we'll continue on. Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Brooke.
Go on through. Technology and performance measurement, there's 2 here, so they both relate. Oh, yes.
Sorry. Because,
Go ahead, Councilmember Gutierrez.
yeah, thank you. Sorry. Just because we're still in the craziness of COVID, could we maybe address the specific item later on in the year to see if we end up even opening up the building for one-on-one contact? It's a little hard to sort of, I know the process hasn't started, but I would like to come back and address it again once maybe we start to reopening and we get a little bit more of foot traffic maybe in the building, or just to see how it's working out later on.
I'm happy to consider that. And is your thinking that perhaps if there were more ability for face-to-face interaction, that we might actually prevent some of the resubmittals
Yes.
without being
Yes,
able to?
it's just really hard right now. I mean, there was challenging before, and I think COVID just made it extra hard for this department to, implement some of these new process. And we're in discussions, we're in transitions. So I would really like to maybe talk about some of these items later on before we wrap this whole committee up. Yeah, just to see how it's actually working.
Sure. That sounds good. Okay. Technology and performance measurement. So this recommendation is focused entirely on our Acela software, which we've been implementing for a while, considered it mostly complete and implemented in March, and then the pandemic. And then we shifted completely to online application intake and electronic plan review. And so that's become, again, another pretty significant workload effort for handful of people working on it directly, and then the rest of the staff adjusting to all those changed workflows and processes. So this continues to still be a workload issue. We did have an Acela administrator hired in February. He unfortunately resigned a couple of weeks ago to take another job. So we have been, when we've needed to, relied on consultant support. Gray Quarter, we intend to continue to rely on that consultant support until we can get a permanent staff person hired again. In the meantime, we've been filling in the gaps. I mean, IT staff obviously is critical to this, but then there's other power users of Acela that have been helping to keep this, keep all these workflows updated. You've got people in Public Works and people in Planning Division who know this software, but it's just not sustainable to keep them on it long term. But we're making a big push to try to get some of these workflows updated and make the process more smooth for both applicants and staff. And then the advisory body to inform implementation of Acela was established a while ago. It's called the Acela Sustainment Team, and they meet pretty regularly and they vet different recommendations for optimizing Acela, for creating reports and writing scripts that automate aspects of our workflow. And that also is a continual need. We would even need that team going forward when we have an Acela administrator again, because there are many departments that use Acela, and then how do we prioritize all those work requests? So that is in process still. And then using Acela to report process milestones. So this is something we're working on. Building Safety has done this and has been able to post on their website for a few months now some statistics about their workload, about the number of building permit plans in review and inspections done. The rest of the divisions are on board with doing this. I think it's just a matter of working out the best way we can do that without creating new reports or new a lot of new work. I think we can use a lot of our P3 performance metrics that we already report on quarterly, and it is available to the public, but it's not very easy to find or very obvious that it even exists. So we do commit to having these type of metrics on our web pages. We are just still discussing the best way to do that. And then develop an automatic report to show a project's progress through the land development process. And I mentioned that earlier, where somebody connected to a project can look up the detailed status of their project and find out where it is in the process. The general public, if they register as a user of Acela Citizen Access, can see not as many details, but still also track a project through just at a higher level of information. So that's possible, but we could probably make that a little bit more user-friendly, but we haven't worked on that part yet. And then, as Ms. Dye mentioned, another way we're trying to keep applicants informed of the status of their project is when we are late in missing our targeted review timeline that we've estimated for applicants. Building and Safety staff is sending an email to those applicants telling them, we're sorry, we're late on this, this is where it sits, and then here's the staff person and that person's supervisor who has yet to complete their review. If you want to contact them and get an estimated time for when you think it might rise to the top of their review queue. And then I just have a couple examples. These are some of the statistics that Building Safety has on their website. They're showing building permit plan checks and the current month, the average monthly totals, and then the same month last year, permits in process, number of inspections, and then enforcement activity. And so that's something we could try to do, find those useful statistics that we can share for other divisions too. And then that's it for technology.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Any questions on technology and performance measurements from my colleagues? Hearing none, we'll continue on to the process clarity.
So process clarity is a big one. The first one here is to clearly define the starting point of the discretionary review process. So that's the process where the project is either requiring design review, so it needs to go to one of the design review bodies. It might need to also go to Planning Commission or the staff hearing officer or sign committee. One of the, I guess maybe one of the surprises that we heard from the Novak group, they were surprised really how our process allowed applicants to sort of choose your own adventure and jump into the process at whatever point they thought was best. We formalized that now. We have very clearly determined the starting point of the discretionary process, and we formalized that in just December, a few months ago. It has caused some tension and some misunderstanding from applicants because they're used to being able to just hop on an ABR agenda for concept review and get on pretty quickly. With formalizing the entry to the discretionary process, we are reviewing every project for completeness when it comes in. So that's up to 30 days that we have to review the project to deem it complete or incomplete. our objective in doing that is really trying to minimize the number of hearings that a project goes through, and to ensure that the projects we do present to our design bodies are able to be found consistent with the municipal code, so that we're not presenting to them projects that we haven't done a plan check on, or that we haven't reviewed for completeness, and then possibly cause another hearing after we do inform the applicant of what's missing or what's inconsistent with the code. So this is where it's one of those things where we talked about with the Novak group, and I think it's come up in past conversations with the full council too, of flexibility versus predictability. And so this puts us much more towards the predictability side of the spectrum, and the applicants, as they learn this new process, will know that when they submit their application, it will undergo a 30-day review. If it's a discretionary application, it's subject to the Permit Streamlining Act. But we'll get them written comments with specifically what's missing, and then they can proceed on to design review or staff hearing officer. So this is an area of tension still, because we're only 4 months into this and people are still learning the new process. So that's where we need some additional communication with our customers about this change. We are also working to communicate with primarily our architects and designers in town to let them know that there is this informal check-in they can do with the design review boards without submitting a formal application that undergoes the 30-day process. They can do a pre-application consultation with the design board. That's something we set up a few years ago, where staff will not review the project at all. We'll just enough to know if it requires a mailed notice, and then we will put it on an agenda for the design board to give them very high-level cursory comments. And sometimes applicants want to do this, maybe, or a developer potentially looking at wanting to purchase the site, but not sure at all if 4 stories will be acceptable in this area. I just want to check in with the design board about this or that. They can still do that. But it's very clear that staff won't review that in the interest of being expedient. So there's more communication we need to have with applicants about that. But we have more or less completed this step. The second bullet here is one where, if anything, we get ourselves into trouble. We identify minimum documentation needed for an application to proceed or to take it in. But then we want to be flexible and we want to be accommodating. And so we let something, it's sort of good enough in the interest of being flexible. But then it ends up usually sometimes hurting overall project timeline. And so again, it's this flexibility and predictability we're struggling with. This one sort of just embodies that entirely. So that's why I'm spending more time on it. But, and it's one where we don't yet know if, at least it's hard to measure, but our anecdotal evidence is that doing this more thorough upfront review of project applications does speed up the process down the road, because it should require less hearings. It should be able to go through the building permit process much more faster. It's just that adjustment as we make this change to the process. And then this is one of the information pages we have in our planning application guide, is what is the discretionary review process. And so this talks about this optional pre-application, but really that the process starts here with submitting a planning application, and then we're going to do that 30-day review. After that, the applicant can still go to conceptual review at the design board. The project may not be deemed complete, but we can still get conceptual comments and then go through with application deemed complete, a decision, and then submitting to building permit application from there. This recommendation is to assign individual building plan checkers throughout the length of the project. So this more or less occurs and has for a while. You'll see planning We implemented this in 2018. Building safety has almost always done this, except if they need to accommodate, of course, extended leave or someone being out. And Public Works as well assigns one engineer to review the public improvement plans. And even if other Public Works staff are assigned to, or different Public Works staff are reviewing a project throughout the life of the project, that their comments are consistent. The recommendation to consider scheduling building safety office hours, this again was trying to get at reducing the number of resubmittals. And so we talked a little bit about this. Could we have an in-person check-in to make sure that the application's ready to be resubmitted before submitting it and having people spend time on it? We could do this. We could probably still do this remotely. It's been a little bit more challenging, again, as I said, with the online application, that we're just not having that sort of like gatekeeper at the physical front counter of controlling the quality of applications that come in. We could explore this further if there was interest in doing something like that. This I mentioned earlier, developing project tiers that trigger different routing and levels of review. So we have the internal level, we have the internal triggers that different divisions have said, you know, I want to see a project of this size or this scope. That's important. My regulations might impact that project, so we should review it early before it gets into the building permit process. And so that's where I said we're currently reevaluating that, because we might have captured too many projects and it's become a little bit overwhelming. The other thing that we're also trying to do is there is some discretion that we have at the staff level of determining whether a design review project is heard by the full board or the consent calendar, and that for ABR and single family design board, consent agenda occurs every Monday, so it's more frequent, and also it's just usually a quicker review for more minor projects. We can be more liberal in our interpretation of what goes to consent or full board and potentially speed up the review of some projects. We balance that with, though, if the design review body doesn't agree and the consent reviewers are not comfortable with that scope of project, they'll kick it to full board, and then we might have lost time if we're too aggressive in trying to determine what we would put on the consent agenda. So it's always a balancing act, but that's something that we're exploring, is those different tiers to trigger different levels of review. I'm creating a streamlined process for simple permits. We've covered this at a couple of the past LDT oversight committee meetings with these on-demand permits. There's 5 different types of projects that now qualify for on-demand if the projects meet certain criteria. Staff doesn't do review, the applicant can get a permit issued immediately, and it's for these 5 different types of projects that we've covered in the past. This one talks about the pre-application review process. So this, we're working on this, maybe not this exact recommendation, but we are working on the pre-application services of the land development team. Reducing the formality and the submittal requirements for a pre-application review team review. What we're doing instead of that is really just, we need to do a code amendment, but we want to make PRT review optional for all projects. Right now, there's a certain type of projects where a PRT review is required before the applicant submits a formal application. We want to make that completely optional. It could reduce a step for some projects if the applicant team has really done their homework and they're just ready to submit a formal application. On the flip side, we have added a number of pre-application services. The land development team divisions have a wide variety of ways the applicants can check in with us. It can be informal counter questions. If it gets more complex than what can be answered in maybe a half-an-hour conversation with somebody, then we ask them to submit for a planner consultation, or submit for a pre-case. We call it like a pre-application case, where we take a little bit more time to do some research and then get them a formal written response to something. They can do the formal pre-application review team review, which does usually require more information, and that gets distributed to all the land development divisions and departments, and we do within 4 to 6 weeks get them a coordinated LDT written response. So we're trying to, and then there's the pre-application consultation with just the design review board, so not staff, but an applicant who just wants to hear from ABR, HLC, or single family design board, am I even on the right track with this project before I submit an application? So there's that, and then there's the recommendation that rather than having this formal submittal process and a written letter after 4 to 6 weeks of review, could we just get a team of cross-departmental staff together at certain times a day, sit down with applicants and just talk with them? And it's something we could explore. We find a lot of times applicants want something in writing from us, though, because either they forget or they just want the documentation for their client. So we could explore that. It might work for some projects. It might not work for all projects. And I think probably might be something we'd want to explore when we are back in person again. This one, identifying changes to the municipal code in order to reduce or eliminate process steps. A couple meetings ago, I think it was back in January, I presented to you our initial list that we had developed internally, as well as through just our experience with applicants, with decision makers, and with the Novak group. Parts of our process that are codified that require a much more formal and really participatory process to make changes to. On this first bullet, eliminating any self-imposed steps, we're constantly trying to do that. A couple of things, a couple of examples that we've done that don't require code amendments, so we've been able to do, is we've allowed administrative design review of projects to occur at the same time that project is going through the building permit plan check process. So prior to implementing this policy, an applicant might need to work with design review staff in the planning division for a week or two, wrestle down whether or not it could be approved administratively, and then if so, that was their entry to the building and safety process, building plan check process. Now we have a more clear checklist on our website that if you can meet these criteria, you could probably qualify for admin review. Just submit to building and safety and we'll review it as part of that. So it gets them into the permit process faster. We're also allowing applicants to submit a building permit application prior to the end of a 10-day appeal period. So discretionary decisions are subject to a 10-day appeal period. We will not, of course, issue a permit because the project could be appealed. It might change, but we are allowing applicants to submit their application. So that review is occurring while we're waiting out to see if the project's appealed. Because the initial review of many building permits can take several weeks, we're not really at risk of accidentally issuing a permit before the appeal period's up. We'd make sure that we wouldn't. And then there's many other ideas we're discussing along those lines. And then there are a number of code amendments we need to make to reduce some process steps. And I presented you some high-level ideas of what those might be back in January. And then our proposal is at your June meeting, I would present to you our actual work plan to make those amendments. Some will take a long time. Some will take a lot of stakeholder engagement and work with the design review bodies and neighborhood groups. So I want to present to you kind of our approach to take those on, because it'll be multi-years to get through all of the potential process steps we could eliminate or streamline. And then along those same lines, this one is very focused. This recommendation is getting at the scope of staff review of plans during the discretionary review process. This has been discussed with the Planning Commission twice, and we haven't been able to get a majority vote on this recommendation. So we're going to reconvene a working group. We have a staff and 3 of the Planning Commission members are going to meet again in the next week or 2 to talk about what to do if while we're reviewing a project through the discretionary process, we discover, we knew that there's violations on the site and they're either related or unrelated to the scope of work. In the discretionary review process right now, the municipal code says we can't call that application even complete until those violations have been abated. We've allowed applicants to abate the violations as part of their project, and that's the code is silent on whether or not those violations are related to the scope of work or not. It's just broad brush across the site. We can't deem the application complete until the violations have been abated. What we've been discussing with the Planning Commission is, can we bifurcate these things? If we know there are violations on the site and it's related to what they're coming in to try to do on their own, I think we more or less agree that those should be roped into the scope of the permit and dealt with at the time, all at the same time. Where there's been disagreement is what to do with violations not related to the project. So someone's coming in for a bathroom remodel, there's on record a violation that the shed was built without a permit and it's in the setback. What do we do with that? Do we make them abate it? Do we start an enforcement case? Do we not do anything? Do we just remain silent and proceed with the bathroom remodel? So it's generated some interesting discussion. We're not, hasn't been resolved yet. So more to come on that one. And then this has to do with stormwater regulations. It's been complete with the City Council adoption of our new stormwater regulations earlier this year. And one more, I think. Nope, sorry. That's it for process clarity and consistency.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Before we take questions, I need to do a time check. We are scheduled to go to 4:30, but I wanted to see when it appears that we could be done by 4:45. Ms. Brooke, is that achievable for
I'll
you?
be fast, yes.
And then for my colleagues, council members Gutierrez and Jordan, are you able to stay until 4:45? See Councilmember Jordan.
Yes, I'm okay.
Okay.
Staying later.
Great. So now I'll open it up for this section to questions. And Councilmember Jordan, you still have your camera on, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Burke, I'm obviously following the scope creep one really close at Planning Commission, and I know it's kind of what I'd call a slog right now. We're slogging through that. It's doing that to the point that I'm worried that, I think it's a really important concept to answer one way or the other, the way you phrase it. It's just important, and I'm just kind of worried that everybody's going to spend I'm now worried that now everybody's going to spend a lot of time and energy and currency, and then that will come up to council and it'll be something different. I'm just curious on your thoughts of that, if that one rises to the level with the amount of time and energy and emotion that it's taking to just resolve that one part setup. And it's a second time a working group's been set up, I understand. So I'm just wondering if it's easier just to resolve that by coming up for a check-in.
Committee member Jordan, that's a great point you raise. And anybody who watched the commission hearing, it's not a surprise. I'm not sharing anything that's not public, is that what a majority of the working group wanted, our city attorneys wouldn't support. So we were kind of at loggerheads. We needed to regroup. So that's why the reforming the working group again, knowing that and trying to find some other compromise language.
Okay. Bug in the ear again. So it's just, I hate to see the struggle. I may not even agree with whatever the outcome is one way or the other, but I just hate to see it one number on that sheet take up so much time and energy when there's other stuff to be attacked also. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Councilmember Gutierrez, doesn't look like your light is on. So we'll go on to the next section, Ms. Brooke. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize. I wasn't aware of the ending time, so I will go much faster. Design review process. So this is creating clear, objective design guidelines for each review board. We don't have these yet. They're very much subjective at the moment, but we are embarking on creating citywide objective design guidelines. We are in the RFP period. And so council will be engaged on that pretty soon once we select a consultant and get underway. Creating a staff report process for design review board. So we checked in with the chair and I believe the vice chair of the Historic Landmarks Commission, ABR, and Single Family Design Board. And what we've agreed to with them is that we would write written staff reports for just projects that were new, different, complex. They didn't necessarily want to see written staff reports for every project. They understood the workload that would create. So we've agreed to just try this out for a while. And then we can always give verbal staff reports for other projects where there's just a couple issues we might want to cover before they review the project. This we've not started. This is defining the standards for at what point projects where there might be changes in the field. So the project's under construction, someone wants to make a change order. What's the threshold for when that change needs to go back to a design review board for approval? Very, very minor stuff can be done at staff level. What needs to go back to the full board? So making this more clear, and I think probably reducing that threshold, however you want to see it, causing less projects to have to go back to design review for changes in the field would be the objective of this recommendation. And again, similarly, reducing the number of design review triggers. So this is one that will take a lot of time to implement because the design review process involves so many stakeholders with differing viewpoints about the importance of the review process. So obviously municipal code amendments to change which projects have to go to design review, which ones don't. So that will be a longer term effort. Similarly, amending the guidelines for each of the design review boards, we can expand the types of projects that we can review and approve administratively. So a little bit lesser threshold to amend that list of projects than the municipal code amendments. Both of those will be having more conversations with this committee for sure on that. Creating visual examples of acceptable pre-approved designs. We have a couple of these, pretty limited scope, but we can work on more of these, I think, as time allows. We did recently update our administrative design review guideline, which sort of just makes it much more, facilitates more administrative review and approval of projects rather than having applicants go to the guidelines for ABR, HLC, SFDB and say, okay, what could possibly be reviewed administratively versus going to the full board or consent. We just put it out there. If you have a project like this, here's how you might be able to tweak it to just qualify for administrative review. Let's get you on your way. So we're sort of turning that conversation around to be like facilitating administrative review. And then we have a couple of examples of pre-approved details for certain projects. We have the Santa Barbara Color Guide. If you choose a color within the Santa Barbara Color Guide, you can get an administrative approval for those types of projects where we review building color. Standardized construction stormwater BMPs, as Ms. Dye mentioned, and we can continue to expand on those types of elements. This is reassign or consider eliminating the single family design board in order to streamline. So if you were at all around in the mid 2000s through the neighborhood preservation ordinance and the creation of the single family design board, you would know that this is a pretty big ask. So what we'd recommend to get us started on this process is to look at just maybe reducing the triggers, reducing the types of projects that need to go to single family design board for review and see if that strikes a better compromise. Before the single family design board existed, even single family home projects went to the ABR. We didn't have an SFDB, so residential projects went to ABR, and their workload was becoming overwhelming. And so we split off, created SFDB, sent more projects into the discretionary review process as part of that neighborhood preservation ordinance. So there's a lot of history there we'd need to unpack to consider this recommendation. So we've not started that one. Okay, and that's that design review process.
Any questions from my colleagues on the design review process? Seeing no cameras turned on, we'll go on to the next section.
Okay, staffing and organizational. This recommends transferring the Creeks Division to Public Works. We've not started on this. The logic behind this is that Public Works staff regularly look at public stormwater infrastructure, and so could there be a better connection and oversight by also reviewing private stormwater infrastructure. I think this is both a budgetary and organizational structure desire. I don't know if there's the desire to reorganize in this fashion, so we've not discussed that. Monitor inspections workload and adjust staffing or performance. So at the time that the Novak group was doing their interviews, they were being told, and it was true, that our building inspectors were overloaded and were not always able to get out to construction sites within one day, which was their goal, was to get out there the next day that an inspection was called for. And sometimes it was going to take 2 or 3 days. So as a result of that, the department asked and the city council granted funding for an additional building inspector with this current fiscal year and going forward. And so that workload continues to be monitored and adjusted as needed to make sure that we can keep construction projects moving once they're underway. Establishing a land development team of employees to discuss and resolve departmental issues. So this has existed for a while. The land development team supervisors within each of the divisions represented by the LDT meet regularly, and that's really at the appropriate level for those kind of decisions to be made. When we need to, something might be elevated to the land development managers, and the managers also meet somewhat regularly, a little bit less so since we've been working remotely, but we'll get involved if we need to make a higher level decision. But really the LDT supervisors do a great job of adjusting process, procedures, talking about project review. And so that exists and is working pretty well. And then we also just recently restarted the counter committee, which met for years and years and then didn't for a couple of years. So this is the staff that specifically works our public counters at 630 Garden Street, getting together to talk about coordinating project review, talk about issues that come up, and just, both. I think this also goes towards that cross-training recommendation too. So as we learn more about what the other divisions do, we can better help our customers too. So just having more of these connections with each other is helpful in that way. And then this gets to this one, which is triaging those questions from people walking into our building. This obviously has been made challenging to almost impossible without having physical lobby for people to come into and intercept them early to help them get to the right counter. But we're doing the best we can with that by referring customers to each other through email or by phone call. We have had remote meetings with counter customers, and now we are just started doing by appointment only in person, so we can start to explore this. But in the meantime, there is opportunity for cross training where we can still be helping the customer even though we're not physically with them to point them in the right way. We used to have a receptionist position in 630 Garden Street. We haven't had it for a while. I think we'd have to talk about going forward, just what type of foot traffic we get in the building, like going forward in the long term, whether any of that trails off with all of our online application submittal and electronic plan review. I think we need to just kind of see what types of customers still come physically into the building and how can we best serve that type of customer. So we might want to wait on that one to see what that looks like a few months from now. And then this is the onboarding process. So I think sort of related to the customer service training across the board for LDT staff. What's the onboarding process for these staff so that we understand what each other does? And again, it gets at the customer service. If we understand better what each other does, we can more fully help the customer. We haven't done that. We did, when we had regular quarterly LDT meetings, we were able to do a presentation of who we are, what we do. Each LDT division would take a meeting, present, introduce all the staff, present what they do. I think that's something we should probably get going again, even if it's remote for the immediate future, because it was really helpful, just even to know some of the newer staff that are being hired. And who to go to put a face to a name. And that is it. It's all 31.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Right on time there. So I'll open up to comment or questions from my colleagues on this or any other questions on the whole presentation if you have any now, and then we'll do public comment after the questions, and then we'll do our closing deliberative comments. So Councilmember Jordan, questions?
Yes, really comments too. So I have a question though. So Ms. Brooke, kind of my first, this is a great presentation. I wish we had set aside like 3 hours for this in a work session to really just chat back and forth on this stuff. So so kind of when I've taken notes on this and kind of made another new column where I put the Novak numbers into the color bar sheet too. So and sprinkled throughout there are some phrases that either I get concerned about or I agree with, and that's like further study, under review, not implemented. Some of them are dollar issues. Some of them are just big. Some of them maybe like the scope creep or just things we just don't want to touch. And as we have this tension between staff and an advisory board. But when do we do, two-part questions. When do we do a temperature check with the committee on the use of those phrases and or take the pulse of council again? Question A. And then B, on stuff you are or do want to move forward to, how are you drawing a connection to the upcoming budget cycle? And, and determining some of this stuff does need money, and is it or is it not a priority either with you or up the food chain?
Great questions, Committee Member Jordan. We haven't talked, so speaking for myself and my understanding, we haven't put dollars on a lot of these things, where on that cheat sheet chart that you're referring to, where it says there's a potential budgetary issue. We don't know exactly what some of those budgetary issues would be, but we did want to highlight that it might be outside consultant help or one-time money for something else. I don't have a good sense of what those dollar figures would be and or the timing to know when or if we would put that into a budget request. I think that's a great question though. Most of this stuff we'll need to do internally, and we plan to do internally. It's all about just prioritizing, and we're trying to take on those things. I mean, it's a mixed bag of taking on the things you can do quickly, because get them done, you can do them quickly, and then this balance with some of these longer term things that can feel a little daunting when you're still trying to do the day-to-day work under the old process you're trying to fix. So it's maybe Ms. Bjork has a better answer on the budget stuff, but I think we'll be able to present to you in June a more defined work plan for those improvements that require municipal code amendments. And that won't necessarily require a budget, other than it's a prioritization of existing staff resources. And so what are the trade-offs to that? And that is always, you know, our discussion about work effort priorities in the planning division and other divisions that have other things they're trying to accomplish too. I'll turn it to Ms. Bjork if she wants to.
Before Ms. Bjork comes on, so you're gonna have to help me with my memory. The emotion of the Novak report was just kind of, to me, said, oh, here's these 31 things, go get them, right? And now that we're starting to see more detailed feedback from you and nuances on, you know, this turns into this, and eventually it's a Amway multi-level marketing crazy rat maze you have to go through, or we can just go knock this off right away. When in this process do we ask for either a junior varsity temperature check from us or a varsity temperature check from council again? When does that happen?
Oh,
Councilmember Jordan, I'll take a stab at that. You know,
Okay.
First I want to start out by acknowledging staff, because as you saw from Ms. Brooks' presentation, we have done a lot. We have a lot that we're trying to address, and at the same time, they're trying to keep up with the regular workload. I like to say basically we're on a long hike, and right now we're at the bottom of a steep hill. So they're not only carrying their normal workload, they're carrying the extra workload of doing these process improvements at the same time. Then if you layer on staff availability and the realities of COVID, not just the work situation, but also the budget situation, we're fighting these issues on multiple fronts. As Ms. Brooks said, a lot of this is going to be, even if we could bring in external resources to try and support it, it doesn't alleviate the need for staff to be managing the process. It's our staff who are the experts and who understand what's there and will guide the conversations and make the adjustments based on input from yourself and the other policy advisors working with the staff. So there are some budgetary elements. I want to commend staff for being creative and finding opportunities for grant funding to take some of these things like objective design standards forward. But I think that we are going to be continuing to work on some of these things for quite a while. And if you remember in the Novak report, several of the items were given multi-years to implement, and several of them are dependent on other changes. And as you heard from Ms. Brooks, some of the changes that we're making, we're finding out, yeah, they were a good idea, but they still need tweaking a little bit. So I think going too fast also has its challenges. We, as much as anyone, want to make these changes so that we're only carrying one burden instead of the burdens of changes and the burdens of doing all the work. So certainly focused on that as well. We will be making our budget presentation to council. You will see it's been a challenge. We are fee supported, and for various reasons, our fees have not met their targets. So it's going to be a tough year for community development next year, as it has been for the entire council, for the entire community. Santa Barbara's budget has been hit harder than any agency I'm aware of. So we are trying to balance all those things while still providing all the many services we provide beyond just land development, including the work we're doing in other areas of the community. And so we will be talking about those things. And certainly if you have questions about these changes during our budget presentation, we can address those in the context of the presentation on money. And then we can have any subsequent conversations about additional adds that council might want to make in that budget process, which is, I think, the proper places you'll be weighing it then against all of the other requests and concerns and objectives you have.
So is there a path right now for a temperature check on this whole scope of work, either with us and then to council? Or because many of the things you just talked about, to me, when I look at that list of 31 things, there's almost some of them that you could just purposely slow down upon and just, you know, free up that. I mean, maybe my opinion, and I'm one of many opinions, but, or do we just go another year and then talk about the work, the body of work again? What do we do?
Councilmember Jordan, one of the items that you'd asked for at the last meeting that we were still going to talk about this afternoon, that's one more item on here, which is the issue of the public workshop. And we are working towards it. We are as staff thinking that a public workshop in August is probably a good time to have a workshop that will be one, just about a year since we embarked on this process. I think our first committee meeting was in September, if I recall. And so give people who've had a chance to come through, maybe see some of our new processes, hopefully people with recent interactions with the department and the land development team in general to share their views and thoughts. And then possibly after that, we can pull together the findings of that public workshop, which I will take this opportunity to just talk about briefly, which is that what we're thinking is that we would like to do an in-person, hopefully we'll be able to do an in-person workshop where we give a summary of the things we're working on, the changes we've made, the things that remain to be done, and then have a listening portion to the workshop asking what's working well, what changes are you liking, what changes do you prioritize going forward? And then that would give us something to give a temperature check back to this committee. And then possibly if you'd like to send it to council, we could do that subsequently as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Thank you, Ms. Bjork. So I'm going to open it up to public comment right now. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this item? Ms. Walters?
Yes, Chair Friedman, thank you so much. We do have a member of the public who has raised their hand. Mr. Sweeney, I will unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. One moment, please.
There, does that work? Good
Sounds good.
afternoon, council and staff. First of all, I want to thank Renee Brook for her extraordinary presentation today. And I want to thank Councilman Friedman and Jordan for all the off-time conversations, getting into the weeds outside these kind of meetings. Thank you so much. Ms. Brook, I was very encouraged by all of your responses today, so I would hope we find a way to communicate that with at least my fellow colleagues on the Single Family Design Board. That might lessen the frustration that I hear from week to week, including myself. So I'm really encouraged. I want to get to one important point. I know I've brought it up on several budget hearings over the years, but that's this idea of having an architect ombudsman to help the individual small homeowner person be able to navigate this process, and also perhaps a way to eliminate them having to come in front of a discretionary review board. If we could get some of that, I see a lot of projects that I just think to myself, with a little bit of help, there was no reason that project had to come in front of the Single Family Design Board. So I would hope that happens. I certainly think that the reports now that are being prepared ahead of our items is really, really helpful as far as I'm concerned. I think that's really important. The other thing that's important, I know currently I just pulled a permit to replace windows on my house and found out that the current process doesn't allow me to post anything in the window. So the public doesn't know I'm going to have a project. Anyway, my 2 minutes are up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Ms. Walters, are there any more members of the public that wish to speak?
No, there are no other members of the public wishing to speak. Thank you.
So I will close public comment and open up the floor to my colleagues for closing comments. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank staff. This is, I don't know how to say it any other way. It's probably the best presentation that we've had while I've been on the committee. And of course, it's the longest and the most arduous one, but this is a huge, huge, huge undertaking. And I think, you know, one of my goals on moving towards the check-in with public workshop and then check-in back with us is to maybe even shed some of the stuff that no longer makes sense or seems to be as serious as it did in the initial mayhem response of the Novak report. There's items on there I could talk to that way. There's other items on there I could talk to wanting to ramp up the priority of them. So, so thank you to Ms. Bjork, Ms. Brooke, all the team underneath that. Looking forward, I think something really to look forward to will be that public workshop and actually getting people like Fred Sweeney and other practitioners in the room to hear what they have to say, hear their suggestions, and then keep moving forward on this enormous list, but keep moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Very salient and great comments. Councilmember Gutierrez. I think we still have you on mute.
Just wanted to thank staff for all of their hard work. I know this year has been very difficult with COVID, and creating structural changes to your organization is always a challenge. But I've been really amazed with all of the updates and improvements you have made. Just starting off with the vision and mission statement for the department is really exciting. And I just want to thank the public for also calling in and sharing their comments. I'm also looking forward to the community workshop. Not only do I want community members that are not experts, but they are familiar with the process for planning, but I would also like to get community members involved that normally don't interact with architects or don't normally interact with this department, just to get that perspective as well. So just thank you again to the staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. I agree with what you just said, as well as Councilmember Jordan. I'll just be brief. This was a great presentation. We probably could have scheduled 3 hours for it, but I really want to thank Ms. Bjork, Ms. Brooke, and Ms. Dye, and all of our staff who helped put this on. I see there's 25 of you who've been on this call, ready to support this presentation. And I think the breadth of it goes to all these recommendations, whether it's IT, Creeks, and so many other departments that are involved with this change. And we're making significant progress. And I think the community is seeing that. I am glad that we're going to be doing the community meeting. I think that is a good opportunity, as Councilmember Jordan suggests, to really take the pulse of some of these things. Might not even be applicable anymore. So we'll have that public feedback and then come back and kind of tighten this up. So that'll be a really good opportunity to do that. And just moving forward, I think that we have a lot of progress, and we're just continuing to do it. And the last thing I would say is if we could reach out to our design boards, at least the chair or the vice chairs of them, to let them know that these are in progress and about the community meeting. I think it was a good point that was raised by keeping the chairs involved of those three committees, that it would help us and help them address some of these issues and know that what's coming. So if that could happen. And with that, no other comments on that, I will close this item and move on to item B, which Ms. Bjork did discuss, which is the public workshop. So I will just, even though it's been discussed, it is an agendized item, so I will open it up on that item. I don't think there's a presentation at this point, unless we have a date set, but it seems like we're looking at August. But do we have a date set, Ms. Bjork?
We don't, Chair Friedman, and you're correct. We do not have anything more than what I had already presented, which is just our thoughts about how to proceed. And I think we will do something less, we won't be quite as in-depth here, and then we need to spend some time really thinking about how to solicit the most meaningful feedback from the community, particularly as has been informed by your committee's input about what do we really want to prioritize to get done, and what things should we just not be pursuing.
Great, perfect. And the last thing I would just add in general on this, but also going back to the previous item, is just the budget issues. If there were specific items that you feel that we would need as a foundation to keep moving this forward, feel free to discuss those or as part of the upcoming budget. Even though we will be limited, but we want to make progress. And so, Ms. Walters, is there any public comment on this item to ask for?
Chair Friedman, there is no public comment on this item. Thank you.
So I will close item B, and then our next meeting And it says a recommendation. Do we need to actually vote on this, Ms. Bjork, to accept this report?
Chair Friedman, you do not need to vote on this item. These are what we are thinking. It's an opportunity. If there's anything else that you would like added to the next meeting, you can tell us that now. Or Chair Friedman, I will check in with you if you have any additional items that you'd like us to cover.
So I'll just ask my colleagues if there's anything additional that you would like for the June 30th meeting. Please turn your cameras on now if you have anything else you'd like to add. And seeing none, we'll close that item, and this meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you in June. Thank you, everyone.